spotlight there.
Utah's collapse moves LA back into the spotlight. Civil War, Apple Cup. Ain't it just great to be a college football fan? And Stanford takes its last stand for the Pac-12, a win for the Cardinal, and then do some heavy-duty calculations for a college football playoff spot. All right, welcome into the Pac-12 Breakdown. We join you each and every Wednesday night. It's 8 o'clock on the West Coast, 11 o'clock here on the cold and shivery East Coast. As I bring in the best bloggers in the Pac-12 from left to right, it's Don King from Last Word on Sports. Mike W.R. geared up for a big showdown on Saturday from Gojo Bruin, and also Nick Dempsey from Rule of Three and also Conquest Chronicles. So, guys, hey, before I forget, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, Mark.
Definitely.
Thank you, Mark. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, thanks for jumping on board, and we're all college football nuts, and it's going to be impossible to have too many TVs in the living room, but let's focus, of course, on the Pac-12 and a ton of great games and very important games. So, Don, let's start with you. It's, of course, Stanford and Notre Dame, maybe a tinge less significant than we expected it to be a couple weeks ago. Mighty big for the Irish. Stanford needs a lot of help, but still this one huge on the national radar.
Yeah, it's really big for both teams, and what this is a play-out game. You know, there is no guarantee that the winner gets in, irrespective of who the winner is. But I can virtually guarantee that the loser has no shot, whether it's Notre Dame or Stanford. So it's still an enormous game, of big importance. You know, it's Notre Dame's closing argument, if you will. They have to have this win. They don't have a conference affiliation, and therefore no 13th game to win to impress the committee. So they have to have it, and probably still would need to hope for a little bit of chaos because, you know, if there are 4 of the Power 5 conference champions with 1 loss or fewer, I think the Irish are probably still going to be on the outside looking in. But given the way the last few weeks have gone, there is no guarantee that's going to happen. In Stanford's case, there's a scenario, there are ways it could happen that Stanford could slip in with 2 losses, but I think even more madness would have to ensue for that to happen. You know, what Stanford wants to do is prove that it can hold its own against the national power in Notre Dame. You can almost guarantee you're going to see black unis on Saturday night at Stanford Stadium, you know, for a little bit more recruiting sizzle out there on the West Coast. They aren't going to want to get shown up by Notre Dame in its annual pilgrimage to the Golden State. And I think you're going to see Coach Shaw empty the playbook and Stanford come to play and to win and to represent and look good on behalf of the conference, but also on its own behalf.
All right, Don, we'll get crazy here. Let's say Oklahoma State at number 11 right now with 1 loss defeats Oklahoma, wins the Big 12 championship after Baylor loses to TCU. So let's see, we're going to need about 17 steps. There's 2. Then we go to the Big 10, and Michigan defeats Ohio State. Michigan State loses. Michigan wins the Big 10 championship after defeating Iowa. Michigan's got 2 losses. Clemson and North Carolina play in the ACC championship game. North Carolina finishes with 1 loss after defeating Clemson in the ACC championship game, but they're 5 spots back of Stanford right now. And, of course, maybe a 2-loss Florida team because they just lost to Florida State defeats Alabama in the SEC championship game. I think that's your scenario.
All that happens, Stanford will get in. All that's not going to happen. You know, some combination of those things could happen. I think a 2-loss Stanford has a great shot against a 1-loss UNC ACC champion because, first of all, that loss UNC had to South Carolina looks worse and worse by the week. I mean, it's horrible, and it looks even worse. So I think Stanford would have an argument there, but by no means would it be a layup. Same thing with Oklahoma State. There would be an argument, but Oklahoma State with a 1-loss Big 12 champion would probably be compelling, and I think would probably get the nod over a 2-loss Stanford. But, you know, it's hard to say what the committee would decide.
And, Don, I think the better half of the Stanford-North Carolina argument is that Stanford's wins are just so much more significant. Even if North Carolina defeats the number 1 team in the country, Stanford has, 5 or 6 wins that are significant versus North Carolina's One, that would be it. They haven't defeated anyone. Pitt might be its best win.
Pitt would be the other option. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Stanford's wins would stack up with just about anybody. That second loss to Oregon was devastating, though.
Mike, look at this. Last weekend of the season, USC-UCLA. This is the way it's supposed to be. Playing for a Pac-12 championship berth all season since week 1 when Utah beat Michigan and then looked like one of the best teams in the country for the first 8 to 10 weeks of the season. It was all Utah, 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 Utah. Who could have imagined that we'd be sitting here the last weekend of the season, not just with Utah having an opportunity to get knocked out, but not even having an opportunity to play for the Pac-12 championship. It's amazing. So USC and UCLA, again, the way it's supposed to be.
It was just a little bit unbelievable, seeing as UCLA lost 2 games early in the conference season to Arizona State and Stanford, and they weren't knocked out at that point, but they didn't control their destiny. And then they had 3 great wins, a loss to Washington State, which they were still in control of their own destiny, which was good for UCLA. And it comes down to 3 teams: Utah, UCLA, and USC on the second weekend. The race got narrower and narrower towards the end of the season. Now UCLA eliminates Utah, who's been on top of the Pacific South Division all year long, and it's come down to UCLA and USC. As you said, this is the way it should be. Back in the day, it was for the conference, but with the conference expanding, now it's division, and whoever wins will go play Stanford. So that's there's just so much excitement with this game, rivalry game, a heated rivalry game, crosstown showdown. But now it has some significance to it. The last couple years, Jim Mora has won every game he's played against USC. He's 3-0 against USC. But USC was kind of on the upswing. They weren't they're coming off sanctions. They didn't have full a full roster with scholarships. They had Lane Kiffin, so they were handicapped. So now it's 2 good teams going at each other. And I don't think USC is at their peak. I think they're going to get better. I think they're going to get a really good coach. Yeah, you just can't screw up another coaching hire. So in the next couple of years, they're going to be very good. They have a lot of talent, but this is where it should be: UCLA versus USC. For some meaning, and not just the city championship, but for some serious stakes.
This brings me back to my childhood because I remember Nebraska, Oklahoma owning the Big 8, and they would play on a Friday usually, and Saturday at noon was Ohio State, Michigan, of course. My heart's melting just uttering those words. And then USC and UCLA from the West Coast right after Ohio State, Michigan. That was college football to me on rivalry weekend way back when.
Yep.
Nick, this USC team, they're 7-4, but it may not matter. Line up against UCLA, they've got a shot to get a date with Stanford.
I'm sorry, could you say that again? There was some noise.
Just basically that USC, despite all the issues and losing 4 games this year, it's right there for them.
Yeah, this is the kind of season where you can give up 100 to Oregon and then still just kind of be in it for the South, because that's just apparently what happens these days. It's very interesting. It's going to be a great game against UCLA, but it's also kind of disappointing because both of these teams were talked about in the national conversation, and Phil Steele and all these folks were very high on USC, and then the bottom dropped out, and then we're back into it without actually really winning the week before. Just very interesting, and I gotta say, it's probably another added frustration for the folks up in Oregon who are just wondering, like, how are these guys have a shot at the conference, and we're coming on just destroying everyone, and man. But welcome to college football. Bet on chaos. That's the only thing I can promise you.
I think early in the season when we talked about the Pac-12 possibly cannibalizing itself, we talked about maybe a 9-3 champion, and we thought we were stretching it. Could we have a 4-loss Pac-12 champion if USC wins and then defeats Stanford?
That would
We could. Well, we certainly
Yep.
could.
A lot of ifs in that question, though. A lot of big ifs. But yeah, we absolutely could. It would be very weird to see a 4-loss team in the Rose Bowl representing the Pac-12. But this is the craziness of this conference. When you have that deep of a conference, it's just, it's just going to happen. It's weird. And I'm sure at times they wish maybe they had as difficult a road as, say, the ACC, but they don't. And this is just what's going to happen from time to time.
Hey, Don, I know that you see Stanford line up every week, and I also know that you've seen Notre Dame quite a few times here and there. The Irish are a bit beat up, but they come out to the West Coast. Your keys to this matchup?
Yeah, I think this one is, like so often, this game is going to be determined in the trenches. I have been a little surprised to see the betting line move the way it has. Last I looked, Stanford was a 4-point favorite, so that's even a slight favorite above the home field advantage. That surprises me. I would have expected far more cash to come in on the Notre Dame side, given its national following. Kaiser is solid. They did not look great last week in slipping by Boston College. Stanford did look pretty good against Cal, but obviously had capable of some hiccups as it was 2 weeks ago against Oregon. I think this is pretty even. I hear Ronnie Harris for Stanford, the cornerback, the best cornerback on Stanford's roster, is iffy. He's 50-50 with an ankle. But Notre Dame has had some fairly severe losses to injury. Kaiser is capable of being a little bit inconsistent. I think it's really going to come down to whether or not Stanford's pass rush can bother him enough to cover for the deficiency in the secondary. If Stanford can get to him up front, to Kaiser up front, I think the Cardinal wins. I do expect McCaffrey to have another good game. I think you're going to see a lot of ball control. Josh Garnett and company are going to try to take the game over and keep the ball away from the Irish offense. I don't see a lot of reason to believe they can't have some success with that. The question is Kaiser going to be able to carve them up, given that inexperience on the back end of Stanford's defense?
Hey, Nick, we'll stay on the Stanford beat since we're right here against Notre Dame. This Stanford team, okay, they've lost 2 games, but in watching most of their games, even the game they lost against Oregon, I think a lot of people would consider this team, and this is one of the reasons they're so highly ranked, despite having the 2 losses, the most highly ranked 2-loss team in the country. I know that Stanford fans, alumni, boosters would be satisfied with a Rose Bowl appearance, considering way back in week 1 what the situation looked like, but if an Iowa, especially a lowly regarded Iowa team, makes the Final Four, or practically anybody from the Big 12, because I don't know that conference is that strong, there's got to be a thought there, especially if Stanford really finishes off Notre Dame, that this may be one of the best 4 teams in the country.
We have quite a few writers at Rule of Tree that are kind of keeping hope alive that they can get in front of some of these 1-loss teams. But yeah, I think they could compete with quite a few of the teams in front of them. I really feel like they could compete with a Iowa, for example, as you mentioned. I'd love to see them compete with an Oklahoma or line up against the Baylor just to see. But they didn't have they're not up there in the conversation for lack of opportunities. So
Right.
It is frustrating. Frankly, I think if they only had the 1 loss and they finished out the season winning the Pac-12, pretty simple case to make. But that second
Yep.
loss,
Yep.
that did them in, and it's frustrating, but you can't really get upset with the committee if they don't leap them forward. But yeah, it's disappointing. But they came out and said, "Hey, we're always out to win the Pac-12, and if we can thump our rivals at Notre Dame on the way to it, great." So everything they set out to accomplish is still on the table for them. But yeah, they had their chances. They didn't get it done.
Hey, Nick, if you can swap hats for us and talk some USC football as they get ready for the Bruins. So basically the way you you in particular set up the game against Oregon with me, pretty much your worst fears for the Trojans came to fruition up there in Eugene. Probably not going to be the same type of game plan against them and the same type of personnel with UCLA. So do you think that USC a much better shot against UCLA, considering just a different pace to the game, different personnel for UCLA? Not saying a worse team necessarily, just a different challenge.
Yeah, I think they have a much better shot of coming up with the win. I'm a little concerned because they're going up against the freshman quarterback, and yet they just, as a team, have apparently decided to just never blitz at all, ever, for no reason. But this is still going to come down to they can't come out flat. They can't get behind early if they're going to try to run the ball 45 times a game and do what they want to do. Because if UCLA jumps out early, I'm sure they'll be more than fine with letting USC run the ball 45 times if they're going to be able to keep scoring. So this is, again, I think the game's going to kind of lay out similar. They cannot go down early, but they probably, hopefully, perhaps might be the better word, will not get torched as badly. But yeah, that secondary, like all our worst fears about that secondary really came to fruition. That was a bad defensive day for USC.
Hey, Mike, Josh Rosen came out of the gate in week 1, had a very impressive showing against Virginia. Then he had a couple rough patches against BYU. And another particular game I'm losing focus on, maybe game 3 or game 4, had a rough game. But he's really stepped it up down the stretch. Has this kid turned out to be even better than you anticipated?
Yeah, a little bit. Just seeing some of his high school tape, you could see what he was capable of. And honestly, just because of circumstances with the quarterback situation and the backup, we haven't really seen a lot of that. We haven't seen Josh Rosen run a lot, which he can do. But that is kind of the only thing that that we haven't seen from him. Although when it comes to throwing the ball around, the handcuffs are off, and he's able to do whatever he needs to do, especially with targets like Jordan Payton, who's just reliable as heck and just getting open and managing to get those yards after catch, and then Thomas Doherty, who's just a big wide receiver / tight end, who just is a mismatch nightmare for certain defenders. It's just really good. It was really important this year that he have a solid cast behind him with Paul Perkins to take over the run game and have so many different receivers. So the entire team and the fan base has been fortunate with that. But it's just to see what he can do week in and week out is truly amazing. I mean, this kid is a freshman and he's already broken several school records this year, and he's looking really good. I mean, he's probably arguably one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the Pac-12 conference. And just to see what he did last week against Utah, even though it wasn't as clean and crisp as he has been, he was able to pick apart Utah from time to time and get the win. Although a lot of the credit goes to the UCLA defense on that end, especially with all the injuries. But man, Rosen is looking fantastic.
Hey guys, before we kick it back to Don, one more thing on USC-UCLA. Is this basically a make or break game when it comes to success, equating success for the season or evaluating success for the season? Because there's a handful of teams in college football that basically almost need to win the national championship for it to be a success. Alabama, Ohio State, whoever. Then you've probably got about 20 teams that think we need to win the conference every year. And so for USC, if they lose this game and they're 7-5, that's a bad year.
Yep. And same for UCLA. I believe that this game makes or breaks the year for each team, because they can say they both beat their rival and won the Southern Division of the Pac-12.
Okay, you
and
took
it
my
would be
question. Because even if USC wins the game, they're only 8-4. But hey, the record's almost inconsequential at that point. They're playing for the Pac-12 championship.
And importantly, UCLA is not, which is also a big deal, and vice versa. I think UCLA feels the exact same way.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%.
All right, Don. I think we'll sweep from left to right again because I want to, now that we've almost completed the season, and this was a talking point much early in the season when there were the big non-conference games, i.e., Oregon, Michigan State, and the like, and certainly before the season started, when it appeared as though this conference had the opportunity to sway the hearts and minds of college football nation and possibly rival the SEC at the top of the hill. So all these mediocre, and I don't want to say mediocre, 8-3, 7-4 records that just flood this conference. Does that speak to the strength of this conference, that it's just so strong that anybody can beat anybody outside of Oregon and Colorado and Oregon State? Or maybe the conference is still very talented, very strong, very balanced. There's no debate there, but maybe not quite what we thought it was going to be. And I'll start with you, Don.
Yeah, I think the conference is exactly what we thought, and I'm going to go with the former, more optimistic argument. I think it's a sign of relative strength across the board and parity that we're seeing teams with records such as they have at this juncture of the season. And honestly, there's basically one gimme, particularly from week 4 on. There's one gimme on everybody's conference schedule. This Oregon State. Colorado put up a great fight against USC. Took UCLA to overtime at the Rose Bowl. I mean, that's not even a layup game anymore. There are 11 teams who will come and try to hit you in the mouth, and if you take a half off, you can wind up losing. So I don't necessarily see any of that as a negative. It is what it is, and with a 9-game conference schedule, it makes for a very difficult task to try to get through unscathed or even with just one loss. So I'm going to take it as a positive sign of strength for the conference.
A fun off-season exercise might be, once we get all the games played, is to have you guys rank the Pac-12 1 through 12, and then match it up against the other 4 conferences and say, okay, Stanford plays Ohio State, or whatever the breakdown is, who wins that game, and then see how it turns out. Not that that's official by any stretch, just saying who would win some hypothetical game. But that would
I'd almost flip it, Mark. I'd almost start at the bottom. Let's look at Oregon State versus South Carolina versus Kansas. Okay, got it. They're all really, really bad. Okay, but then let's look at Colorado versus the second worst team in each of those conferences, and maybe you got a Vanderbilt and I don't know, Iowa State, who felt bad enough to just go ahead and fire their coach. And now it's a little more interesting, and I think that shows what we're talking about. It's not that long before you get to some Pac-12 teams that other relatively poor teams in other conferences just wouldn't feel like playing.
Yeah, so take that argument up one more rung. Who do you have in 9th or 10th place in the Pac-12?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean,
and that team would be pretty good.
Exactly. By record, it's probably UW. Because they're the last of the teams that haven't gotten to 6 wins yet that still could. If they win the Apple Cup, they get to 6, and there'll be 10 bowl-eligible teams. Yeah, you don't really want to play the Huskies right now. You really don't.
No, we don't.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I go through a little bit more of a calculated process, and I won't bore you guys with that. I think Don might be a little bit familiar with that, but
I am.
I will be measuring the conferences once we get all the games played, and I seed them and play them off and the whole deal. And the Pac-12, even though I personally thought that the SEC was slightly better at the end of last season than the Pac-12, statistically, in measuring the games against each other within the Power 5, the Pac-12 played the best against the other 4 conferences than the other 4. They were the best conference based on just the something like 22, 26 games played amongst the conferences. All right, what do you guys say we line them up and talk about them? So if there's any teams, any matchups here that we haven't talked about yet, this will be your opportunity. And we allow Don to defer to his picks coming up in about a day and a half, something in that range. There on Last Word on Sports, and we'll check out Don's picks right there. All right, Nick, let's start with you with the Apple Cup here. Washington State can really finish off in style with a rivalry victory to go to 9-3, 7-2 in the Pac-12. Washington State at Washington.
I think you got to keep going with Washington State until someone proves you otherwise. At this point, they just seem to just keep it going. It's crazy. You would think the air raid eventually would begin to fall apart. I know it's a rivalry game. You got to throw some of the stuff out, but they're playing hot. I'm not sure what their quarterback situation is, so you might want to keep an eye on that.
Yep.
But yeah, I think they're going to keep it rolling until someone can prove them otherwise.
Hey, Mike, believe that we could have stated at some point this season that UCLA lost to Washington State and still won the Pac-12 championship.
Yeah, really. That's just how crazy the Pac-12 is. I mean, also, look, USC just lost to Oregon, and they're still in the Pac-12 South races.
Yep. Yep.
It's, very, I love this conference. It's fantastic. But, I think Washington State is rolling right now. I mean, looking what they did to UCLA, that kind of made me a believer. I thought that they were just kind of rolling on some luck there. And no, they have some talent. And the Pirates' game plan seems to finally be, coming to fruition here. So it's, a pretty scary team. Washington was pretty decent this year, and I think Peterson has it going in the right direction. But right now, Leach just has, those, 2 or 3 years on Washington, and I think that this is going to be a really good Cougars win.
It took the College Football Playoff Committee like a few weeks to finally catch on to Washington State being pretty good, Don. Washington State taking on the Huskies.
Yeah, this actually I think is going to be a really good, very memorable Apple Cup game. And here's the key question, and Nick touched on it. I am of the mind, I am not a medical doctor, I do not think Luke Falk should play in this game. He has looked more than a little bit wobbly in like 3 of the last 4 contests.
Yeah.
And I don't think he should be out there. Now, that said, he may be cleared and he may play, and if he does, I think Wazoo wins. But if he doesn't, give me UW at home all day.
Okay. Let's go to the Civil War, Don. Oregon State. This has been a bit of a mismatch, but during some of those mismatch years, the Beavers have risen up, but they had much better teams than they do in this particular 2015 edition at 2-9, taking on the Ducks, and they are surging at 8-3.
Yeah, the Beavs have no quarterback; they have no shot.
Mike, what do you say with Oregon State and the Civil War?
Oregon State, that's cute. No, I'm just kidding. Oregon is just rolling. Vernon Adams is just destroying people right now, and I feel bad for Oregon State because they're not going to win.
Nick, I know you watched Oregon play football last week, so should I even ask?
Oh man, it's gonna get. You know what? I'm actually this close to just picking Oregon State, just because you could laugh it off as a joke afterwards when they get crushed. But if they somehow, by some miracle and/or act of God, win this game, like you can replay this clip and be like, "Oh my gosh, Nick Dempsey's a genius." But no, I don't think it's gonna be close after like the first couple minutes. Oregon's just playing too well. They're probably playing a little bit angry.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't see it.
I gotta say, if VA could have gotten that broken finger healthy just a little bit sooner, we may be having a totally different conversation right now going into the last week of the Pac-12 season.
Yeah. Now that's a team I would love to see line up against an Alabama or a Clemson or something like that right now. Absolutely.
Oregon?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, the way they're playing right now.
I don't know. I think we saw that against Ohio State last year, didn't we?
Yeah, we saw it against Florida State too, though.
They did defeat Florida State, and Florida State, even though they looked awful in that game, still brings top 5 talent. Yeah. So you're right.
Yeah, they'd be in the mix for sure. Don't know that they would do it, but they'd give just about anybody, I think, a really good game right now.
All right, Don, to your point a few minutes ago about the Buffs.
Yeah.
The Buffs go to Utah, and on paper, 4-8 versus 8-3. But Colorado had USC and UCLA on the ropes. They seem to be playing better each and every week.
I agree. I think McIntyre finally kind of turned a bit of a corner, has them headed in the right direction. They're playing hard every week. I also think Utah's going to be down a little bit. This is, they are at home, but they were at home last week when they got mollywopped, and basically took themselves out of the Pac-12 South race. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Colorado come in there and stun them. I'm going to pick Utah in a really close game, but I think Colorado is going to give them all they want because, Utah's going to go up there and they're like, okay, great, we're playing for the right to go to, I don't know, Santa Clara for the Foster Farms Bowl versus the Vegas Bowl. Who cares? I think they may be wanting a little bit of motivation, which could bite them a bit. Colorado's just still on the upswing, and this is their bowl game, one way or the other, and I think they're going to come to play.
Okay, Mike, you heard Don. You don't want to get mollywopped against your rival. So Colorado and Utah.
I think Colorado has definitely improved. Unfortunately, their record doesn't show it. And when you're the last place team in the conference, even when you're improving, it's not really going to show. But I think Colorado's going to play the closest game they have against Utah. But Utah might just come out, mad as hell and put a spanking on Colorado. But it could go the other way too. This is the weirdest rivalry game in the Pac-12 conference just because it's forced. But I think it's gaining some steam, and you'd like to see a game that has a bit more umph and vinegar in it, just to make it sour for the next couple of years. So hopefully Colorado becomes a little bit pesky and swipes at Utah a couple times, and this might be a chance to make this a proper rivalry. But for the most part, I think Utah's going to come out with this win. After last week, they're not going to want to have a loss for their last game of the season. So.
Well, you're right, Mike. Shane Roberts was on a few weeks ago, and he kind of scoffed at the rivalry with Colorado. It's a bit of a forced rivalry, just like we'll see on Friday with Iowa and Nebraska. It's the conference saying, basically, you two are going to be rivals. You're going to play in the last week of the season. But geographically, it makes sense. And actually, the Pac-12 does it better than any conference in regards to they're all paired up nice and evenly from state to state, and this is the only one that's a little bit forced. It's the best pairing of rivalries of any conference in the country. Arizona State, Washington State, et cetera, all the way
I agree.
through. So Nick, any thoughts about the Buffs taking on the Utes?
I think they've both touched on it. I think this is really going to come down to sort of the emotional, mental state of Utah. They just come out completely depressed and deflated after the last 2 weeks, then Colorado can make a good game out of it. If they can't come out, pretty angry, looking to sort of prove themselves, then it could be a bit of a mauling in the mountains, and Utah could take this one away. But yeah, I think on paper Utah is the way to go here.
It just hit me, guys, that Arizona's not playing football this week. They're done, right?
Yep.
Yeah, 13 straight weeks over.
They finished up early, and they are waiting for are they 6-6, their bowl trip? I think they are. All right.
Yep.
So Arizona State, having won the rivalry game in convincing fashion, goes out to Cal. Nick?
Man alive, Cal. Oh, those poor guys up there. Okay, but the back half of their schedule has just been brutal. I don't know a lot of teams that could run through that unscathed. What do they have left in the tank? They lost 4 out of the last 5? 5 out of 6 now. They lost to Stanford.
Yes,
they've already got their bowl spot.
Maybe.
I guess what?
They may have their bowl spot because they're petitioning for that win over Grambling to count. And it's
that's
kind
right.
of
Okay.
Yeah, we'll see. It's dependent on the number of scholarships that Grambling has proffered. We'll see how the NCAA rules on that, but they could find themselves at home if ASU beats them, which does make it a bit more interesting.
I've always said my favorite part of college football is contract law, so that's good. But no. So I guess if they do have something to play for, that's good.
Yep.
They'll come out fired up. But they've had a tough back half of the season. But they're talented. They should compete. But whether or not they can put it together and come out there and win, that's a whole other story for them.
This whole Notre Dame business playing Stanford has ruined everything. We should have Arizona State playing the last game of the season.
Yeah, and Stanford Cal should be on the last weekend. I'm always going to feel that way, but that's life sometimes.
Well,
Mike,
that's every Pac-12 rivalry it seems. Last year, UCLA, USC played at UCLA, and that wasn't the last game of the season. That was that dreaded game where UCLA lost to Stanford brutally on a Friday after Thanksgiving. It just makes no sense, especially when mid-season rivalry game. That's just weird.
Agree.
Yeah.
So, Mike, what do you think about this one with Arizona State at 6-5 taking on Cal 6-5?
This is tough because Arizona's up, they're down, they're up, they're down, and they're bipolar for the most part it seems. So I picked Arizona last week, and they just let me down. Although I don't want to pick Arizona again this week because I think Cal still has a little bit in the tank. They're going in the right direction offensively. Their defense, I think, needs to do a lot better to be competitive in the North. But yeah, I'm going to go with Arizona State on this one.
All right, Don, got any thoughts on the Golden Bears hosting Arizona State?
I think ASU wins. I think Cal would like to win. I think they'll show up, but I think Arizona State is just better. Berkovici, we've talked about this before. He's been inconsistent and a little bit disappointing. Had a big game last week. I think he plays well again this Saturday, and I think ASU comes out with the win.
All right, Don, let's lock it down right here with you and go to the first of the two biggies with Notre Dame going all the way to the West Coast to take on Stanford.
Yeah, this game, we touched on it a little bit. I think this is all about Lance Anderson and his ability to scheme, to keep Deshaun Kaiser kind of in front of the defense and within the pocket, and to pressure him and get him on the ground a little bit too to protect the secondary. It says here that I think he comes up with a good enough plan to accomplish that. And there's really one statistic in this series that matters. In the last 6 games, the home team is 5-1. The one exception was Stanford's win over Notre Dame in 2010 at Notre Dame Stadium. If the game were there, I think the Irish would have a shot. It isn't. I think Stanford wins probably 5 to 7 points. Single score kind of game, but I think more than a field goal.
Okay, Mike, your thoughts about two of the top 9 teams in the country getting together, Stanford and Notre Dame? Oh, we may have lost Mike. We'll move on to Nick. We got Stanford hosting the Irish.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
phased out. Huh? Did what? No. This is. I just want to see how this game turns out because Stanford has national implications on the line here, and obviously so do the Irish, and despite the fact that it's been about 57 years since UCLA has beat Stanford, I do want to see a Pac-12 representative in the college football playoffs. So. Although, funny enough, if by chance UCLA wins and then goes to the Pac-12 championship game, I think the only way a Pac-12 team would go is if Stanford would to beat UCLA or USC at that point. I think the committee is really going to look at conference championships. Although if UCLA does go, to hell with Stanford. But I'm just kidding. But honestly, I do want to see, I want to see a representative there. Stanford has proved it. Aside from that first game, that first game against Northwestern, that was a bit weird, and we thought, okay, Stanford's down again. But they came back up, clawed their way back. Had a really good game with Oregon, but they won the North Division, and waiting for the South winner. So it's for the conference, I'm going with Stanford on this one. So Notre Dame, they've whatever, they'll be fine. But I'd like to see Stanford come out and make a national stamp on the college football rankings.
There's probably some Google Hangout there with out there somewhere with Northwestern guys going, "Hey, we're 9-2 and we beat Stanford. What about us?"
True. Yeah,
All right, Nick,
their
what do you
two
think?
losses. Yeah.
Yeah.
Their two losses are Michigan, Iowa. Anyway, all right,
Yeah, they're
Nick.
not horrible, but
But it's Northwestern.
So Nick, we've got Notre Dame, Stanford.
I like all of Don's points for sure, especially about containing Kaiser, because the guy has a cannon and big Will Fuller. That guy, when that guy gets loose, number 7, the wide receiver for Notre Dame, they can put up points from anywhere. So they're going to have to really try to make sure that ball does not get in the air. But I also want to point out that Notre Dame has really kind of been a turnover machine in some pretty big spots. I think they had 5 last week against that, vaunted Boston College. They had several against Clemson. I think they had a couple against Wake Forest. They've been getting away with it because they can put up points, and it's not terribly difficult to beat Boston College or Wake Forest or Massachusetts. But this is not Wake Forest and Massachusetts. This is Stanford. So I think if they're not going to get away with having 3-4 plus turnovers against Stanford. That's going to end very badly for them. So I think Stanford has to both force and capitalize on turnovers, and they should be fine. They're also at home. You've got, a freshman quarterback versus a quarterback who's been the starter at Stanford, I believe, since the Reagan administration. So it should be good. But again, they can be explosive. Notre Dame's very boom or bust. Everyone thought they were headed towards a blowout against Clemson, and then they just kind of started tossing the ball in the air, and all of a sudden they were back into it. But yeah, I think over the course of 60 minutes, Stanford's probably better by a touchdown or so.
All right, Nick, let's line up USC and UCLA playing at the Coliseum, and for the second consecutive year, the winner of the South is going to be 6-3 in the conference.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about USC's defense. I think if they're not going to blitz, which they don't bring pressure on defense, then I think they're really going to have to do a very good job on disguising coverages, which is asking a lot from a secondary that's like all underclassmen at this point, I believe. If they can't do that, I think Rosen and the gang is probably going to put up plenty of points. They absolutely cannot come out flat in the first quarter. Like that seems to be their pattern the last month and a half at this point, because they're not going to be able to come back. This is not a banged-up Arizona. This is not Colorado. This is UCLA. They tried that against Notre Dame. They tried that against Oregon. It failed miserably. They're going to have to come out and really try to dictate early on, get some stops early, get the running game going. If they don't, I think UCLA wins this. But since it's rivalry week, the heck with those guys. USC wins.
All right, Don.
Wow.
Don, I know that the conference is extremely balanced, but this could not only turn out to be the de facto Pac-12 South championship game for this year. The way these programs are building and the talent on the roster, this could be the de facto championship for the next few years.
I don't disagree with you. And in particular, it sets up really, really well for UCLA, who's, locked and loaded at quarterback for at least the next 2 seasons, and that's if Rosen comes out early. I have a question for Mike on this. Mike, is UCLA, are they going powder blues? Are they doing the powder blues and UCLA in the home red again? Are they going to take that exception and make that happen again in this game?
First off, we haven't had powder blues in a while. We're true blue now. But yes, that's something that that
you know what I mean.
No, I definitely know what you mean, but that's something that they've kept since Neuheisel was there, and it was there was one game where Pete came out with I think it was at the Rose Bowl. Pete came out with USC's home jerseys, and then respectfully Neuheisel called timeout. So it was after that it was more of an agreement, because for one thing it just looks fantastic. The contrast.
It looks so good on television.
It definitely does. And you can definitely tell which team is which, so it's not
Yeah,
like a
totally
disadvantage
agree.
advantage for one. So, but just to have
Right.
the cardinal and gold and the blue and gold right there is just just perfect. So most likely we're going to see that. We saw that in the last couple seasons, so I don't see why it would change. But as far as the game goes, I like.
Well, well,
Sorry,
give
go
me
ahead.
let me get my pick right quick.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
We got UCLA in blue. I think Rosen has a big game, even on the road at the Coliseum. I agree with Nick's point. USC's defense is suspect, and I think they can be exploited and they can be had. I think you're going to see some balance. You'll see UCLA's running game pick it up a little bit, and I think Rosen actually is going to pick them apart. So give me UCLA in blue by more than a touchdown at the Coliseum.
Okay, Mike.
Jim Mora just seems to get up for certain games. Don't know why he can't get up for Stanford, but this just seems to be one of them. He's 3-0 against USC. This is going to be his fourth head coach, interim or not, that Mora has faced in the USC UCLA
That's true.
rivalry. So that's
Yeah.
awkward.
Wow.
But
Wow.
and just Helton has not. He pissed off a lot of Trojan fans last week, so there's not a lot of confidence there. Before that there was some surge, some backing for him to maybe take over as head coach. Not after last week, especially with what Oregon's offense did. They pretty much picked apart the USC defense, which was surprising actually. I'm a little bit surprised in how that's going, but for the most part. I think if UCLA keeps on their offensive game and it's a shared balance between Rosen and Perkins in the running game, they should have no problem offensively. Defensively, the Bruin defense has been the heart and soul of this team. They have played. I would throw it out there and say half of their games they played. Twice as long as the offense did. So, they're bruised and battered, but they have a lot of young talent who's really stepped up. And last week, we even saw a kid who, sparingly played, and Nate Metters, perfect example of how much talent they have and how much depth. The kid came out and was just swatting balls left and right, and he was disallowing, anything that Travis Wilson was throwing out there. So I think, they're going to have that fire and that flair. And, I think it's going to be a Bruins victory. They're going to hold down the Trojans, maybe one, maybe two scores. So I think right now USC is still on the upswing, but Mora has the Trojans number.
To echo Don's sentiments, when it is sorry to say, the powder blue of UCLA against the garnet and gold of USC, especially when they play at the Rose Bowl, it's the prettiest setting in college football, and the prettiest looking color scheme and look, especially with the beautiful blue skies and the sunshine. Yes, it is amazing to behold USC-UCLA. And I thought, to Don's point, when he was asking about whether we're going to wear the powder blues, I thought UCLA had taken this drastic turn permanently of wearing black constantly. It seems like every time I flip on the Bruins, you're wearing black.
Or that deep navy. Yeah. Yeah, but I like the tradition. I like the lighter blue with the cardinal and gold. Great contrast. Yeah, it is. It actually, Mark's right. It's even better at the Rose Bowl, but I'll take it at the Coliseum. It's a visual spectacle. Should be a good game, to be honest. Should be.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Man, it's been a whole lot of fun, like it typically is. I appreciate the information and the insight. I want you guys to have a happy Thanksgiving. And we'll do it all back here next Wednesday, and we will have a Pac-12 championship game to set up for everyone and a possible impact on the college football playoff. We shall see. So for Don King from Last Word on Sports, we got Mike WR from Gojo Bruin, and, of course, Nick Dempsey from Rule of Tree and Conquest Chronicle. Hey, guys, we'll catch you later.
Thanks, Mark. Happy Thanksgiving.
Good weekend.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.